Hey everybody, Gromos here with another DCS video. And this time we got a helicopter again. After having some fun in the KA-50 last time, I thought I'd take a look at the UH-1 Huey. And talk a little bit about this helicopter and the module, and take a look at the mission or two in it. Now, the Huey is one of those DCS modules I most definitely wanted to take a look at sooner or later, as it is probably the most iconic helicopter ever produced and among the most iconic aircraft in general. The typical wop-wop sound it makes, thanks to the large twin-blade rotor, is generally enough to give aviation enthusiasts goosebumps. And I also read a lot of memoirs of Huey pilots, increasing my interest in this helicopter even more. So the Huey is certainly a module I wanted to take a look at eventually, though at first I was a bit reluctant to get it, since I was not sure how well it would work with my current setup. But since the KA-50 worked great and is a lot of fun to fly, I figured I'd step it up a notch and try the Huey as well. So a few days ago I got the UH-1 module. And as it turns out, thanks to the trim system, the Huey works just fine with my setup. As a matter of fact, I would say it might just be my favorite module so far. Though that's hard to tell, because those full DCS modules are all great with all their detail. But as I have said, I'm a bit biased towards the Huey, and I have a great time with it. The Huey is of course a bit of an older design from the 60s, so it doesn't have too much sophisticated electronics to worry about, but that also means that the flying is up to you and you alone, and you don't get any stabilization programs and the like. But that is of course a big portion of what makes the Huey helicopter so fun to fly. It is one of those aircraft there is always something to learn when it comes to flying it, and room for improvement when it comes to one's flying. To get better and better control over the helicopter, especially in a hover for example. It is of course well known that keeping a helicopter stable in a hover is one of the more difficult things to learn, and this is of course also represented in this module. And I like this if I know I can play a module like this for months and longer, and there are still things to become better at, being able to get the helicopter landed in tighter spaces and faster for example, or more and more precise when hovering it. The footage at the moment is also from a little bit of hover training, and I have to say, even this just flying around the map and looking for things to hover into and land on is tons of fun for me. Now, in comparison to the KA-50, the Huey is of course a helicopter with a traditional layout, with a main rotor and the anti-torque tail rotor. Because of this, the helicopter is also a bit more vulnerable to vortex ring state and retreating blade stall, something you have to keep in mind, especially when landing. You can't just hover over a spot and descend straight down, at least not at any kind of speed, as the helicopter so would descend into its own rotor downwash and lose lift and crash. So you have to do a proper approach when you want to lose altitude fast and land somewhere quickly. And again, getting proficient and better at this is one of the big motivational factors for me when flying the Huey. The helicopter, while not very fast, actually feels pretty nimble also, especially in the slick configuration without external weapons that weigh it down. I hope we will eventually also see a UH-6 Loach in DCS to go with the Huey. One could build great scenarios with those two, like ping teams, and I really wonder how the Loach flies in comparison to the Huey, which to me already feels decently nimble, but the Loach would be a lot lighter still. But we will get a taste of this with the upcoming Gazelle module, I guess. Now, the helicopter we have in DCS is the UH-1H, the most produced variant of the helicopter. This version entered service in around 1965, replacing the older D model, which was the first long cabin Huey. The A, B and C having a shorter cabin, and as one would expect, is simulated extremely detailed in DCS, and I hope I can show you some of that in this video. Now, the primary difference of the H model to the earlier D is having a stronger engine producing 1400 horsepower instead of 1100 on the D module. So you can carry some more weight without overloading the helicopter, which is especially useful in the gunship role. By the way, as the Huey originally entered service, the naming scheme for them was the other way around, as it is now, so they were called HU-1, not UH-1, and this is how the helicopter got its nickname Huey, as HU-1 when just read kind of sounds like this. Shortly after though, the naming conventions got changed, with the role of the aircraft coming first in the designation and then the type, like helicopter, second, so the designation changed to UH-1 for utility helicopter. While the helicopter is primarily meant as a medium transport helicopter, it was, as is well known, of course also used in other roles like as a gunship. And so you can do in DCS as well. The UH-1 in DCS can be equipped with a variety of armament options. There are 2 door gunners you can add, for example, which can be equipped with either pintle-mounted M60D machine guns or the M134 Gatling guns. The M60D is the helicopter version of this also famous machine gun, and in the D version replaces the standard M60's pistol grip and buttstock with a spade grip as well as a butterfly trigger, similar to what you see on the M2HB heavy machine gun. Now, the door guns are pintle mounted, which gives them a decent field of fire, however limited by the fact that the guns are fixed to the pintle mount. From what I have read, in Vietnam this was often changed in the field, and the door gunners used regular M60s that were simply hung in the door with a bungee cord, which gives them more mobility and a larger field of fire, as they could lean out of the helicopter and even aim below and behind it, though I guess that would be difficult to simulate. Now, instead of the M60s you can also mount M134 Gatling guns in the doors, which give the door gunners a lot of firepower versus light targets, but the guns and their larger ammo supply also add quite a bit of weight. I hope that eventually we will also see dual M60 mounts as an option for the door gunners, as they were used on Australian bushranger gunships, which are also UH-1Hs in the configuration we have in DCS. Now, the door gunners can be controlled by AI or the player. And door guns can be fitted to the slick version of the helicopter as well as the gunship. Now, the UH-1 can of course also be used as a gunship, while most variants that saw service in Vietnam were also used as a gunship to some degree. It was usually the short cabin UH-1Bs and Cs that were used in this role to keep the longer cabin Hueys free for transport missions. However, not exclusively, and the H version was also used as a gunship. It has the advantage over the older B-model gunships that it has a much stronger engine with 1400 horsepower, while the B models only had 970 or 1100 horsepower, and as a result were usually flying completely overloaded. Now, you can overload the UH-1H as well if you hang all the weapons on it, but not by as much as the original UH-1Bs were generally overloaded just by carrying their normal weapon load. You can still take the H straight up into a hover, which you often could not do with loaded B-model gunships. Now, as armament in the gunship role, you get two M134 Gatling guns on flex mounts, as well as two rocket pods, either 7 or 19 tubes each, with a variety of warheads. Now, the two miniguns can be used either in flex mode or in stowed mode. In stowed mode, they are fixed forward firing and the pilot uses them with his gun sight. In flex mode, the guns are basically mini turrets, and the co-pilot can aim them with his gun sight, which looks like a box with a pistol grip and a reflex sight on top of it. In flex mode, the miniguns can point almost 90 degrees to the side or almost straight down. As for the rockets, other than the normal high explosive warheads, you also have white phosphorus smoke rounds, which might be useful in a forward air controller role, as well as parachute flares for night missions. Well, that is a bit of an overview of the UH-1H in DCS. Let's take a look at some quick missions in the helicopter to show off its capabilities and the capabilities of the module. Now, the scenario in this mission here is pretty simple. A recon patrol has spotted an enemy force consisting of infantry and light armored vehicles approaching a remote friendly outpost, call sign LC Bravo. Our Huey gunship, Griffin 26, was close by and called in to assist the outpost defenders in repelling the attack that is expected soon. Now, since I'm getting close to the outpost, I already activated my weapon systems on the center console to my left, powering the weapons and selecting the rocket pods, as I intend to engage with them first. Getting rid of the weight makes the helicopter more nimble, or so I hope. And I am carrying the large 19 tube pods, which are pretty heavy. You can also adjust salvo lengths from firing one rocket pair with each trigger pull up to 7 pairs. I have set it to 1 pair as I intend to engage from shorter ranges, but more accurately, which is also why I adjust my sight for shorter ranges. Longer salvo lengths are useful when you want to saturate an area from longer ranges. Now, the outpost called in and announces that it is already under attack and that there are enemy vehicles approaching it from the east and north. The outpost should come into sight now, and I have my dart gunner set to fire at will to engage enemy infantry, while I take out the vehicles with my rockets. As the outpost comes into view, I can see the attacking force. They are on the slope of the hill to the east of the outpost, firing down on it with heavy machine guns. I have high explosive warheads loaded, not heat, but versus light vehicles like those BRDMs, this is still sufficient to take them out. Their armor only protects versus rifle fire. Now, the defenders seem to have managed to knock out 1 or 2 of them, and I start to fire at the rest. I try to get pretty direct hits on them, as the high explosive warheads are otherwise not enough to take them out. As I suppress the enemy vehicles that were focused on the outpost, I don't take any return fire on my first pass. I fired a few pairs of rockets, but I'm not sure yet how much I hit as the smoke from the explosions concealed the targets. As I keep going along the valley to the north, I can see a second group approaching the outpost to my left, and I decide to attack them after I turn around. Pulling up and turning around afterwards, I shortly hear my low RPM warning come up. As I pulled on the collective to increase lift and climb, the rotor also creates more drag, making it harder for the engine to keep its speed up, and when it gets too slow, you get a low RPM warning. Easily fixed by dropping collective down a bit, as long as you have the altitude to do so. After turning around, I go in for my second attack run. I fire at pretty close range to get accurate hits, but I do try to keep my speed up, since at least some of those vehicles have 14.5mm machine guns, which can do lots of damage to our helicopter. But luckily we managed to take out a lot of them before they switched targets to us. I thought I also have taken out the last enemy vehicle on the east side of the outpost, but as I look back, I can see that I apparently missed with all my rockets and it is still up and now firing on me. I can hear a hit on my helicopter. So I come around to re-engage and try to take this BRDM out as fast as possible before it hits me again, so I start to fire my last rockets at it. And this time I think I get it. There is one more BRDM to my left, but it seems he gets hit and set on fire and taken out by a 50 cal from a friendly M113 armored personnel carrier, which is sitting in the rear of the LC. So with all of those vehicles taken care of, I start to hunt for some enemy infantry. They are hard to see, but I could spot some of them on the east slope, and my door gunner was firing at the tree line to the north of the camp, so there has to be something as well. I switch my weapons to my Gatling guns and give my co-pilot permission to free fire on targets, so he gets his gun sight uncaged and will attack enemy targets with the dual Gatling guns in flex mode as I approach them. And he hoses down the slope with machine gun fire as we fly over it. Now after a deck run on the slope, I tell my co-pilot to hold his fire again, which makes him put his gun sight in stowed mode and switches the Gatling guns to stowed mode as well, and to pilot control, and I fire them in fixed mode from now on, as I start to do a strafing run on the enemy forces in a tree line which I saw earlier. Individual troops are hard to see, but I know there are enemy forces there as my door gunner was firing into this tree line in the north earlier, and after zooming in on it I can spot a few enemy troops there, and I start to spray their position with fire from my twin Gatling guns. And apparently we got some good hits on it, because the LC is calling in and informs us that the enemy is starting to retreat. The attack is over. And we just start to climb a bit to get out of this valley and get ready to leave the area, when Landing Zone Bravo comes up on the radio again and is asking for a medevac. Apparently they have wounded, and while a dust of medevac helicopter is on the way, some can't wait this long. So of course we get ready to land inside the landing zone to pick up the wounded and get them to a medical facility. Time seems to be of the essence, so I want to get down there pretty quickly, but as I've explained earlier, you have to be careful with a helicopter when descending, not to get into a vortex ring state and crash. Also, if you dive down too quickly, it can happen that you get too fast and get into a retreating blade stall. All things to consider when landing. Now I plan to descend past the outpost and then do a landing approach from the south, more or less, keeping an eye on my variometer, which tells me my rate of descent as well as my airspeed, to avoid the dangerous combination of a high rate of descent with no airspeed. If I descend at a decently high rate, I also want to move so I don't descend into my own rotor downwash. I am still pretty new to this, and the heavier gunship handles a bit different than the slick I trained on, but I eventually get the heli landed. It ain't the most pretty landing I ever did, but it does get the job done. Now, in this scenario, the nearest proper medical facility is the Kutaisai airport, about 85 km to about the southwest. I have a rough idea about in which direction it lies, and by now probably know enough about the landmarks to get there, but that would not be the fastest way, and time is of the essence, so I want to fly towards Kutaisai in a straight line after I am loaded. And in order to do so, I use the automatic radio detection finder that is installed in the Huey and in most aircraft. All the airports on the map have a non-directional beacon, pretty much a radio tower that simply sends out a continuous radio signal in the kilohertz range, which I can home in on. Kutaisai is sending on 477 kHz, so I turn my automatic radio detection finder on and start to dial that in. You can hear the static stop every time I get the beacon tuned in and the needle for the radio compass move on the compass in front of the pilot. Now, since there are multiple beacons and sometimes close together in their frequency, they send a 2-letter identification in Morse code, so you can make sure that you have the correct one. In case of Kutasai, it is TI, which is conveniently simple, 1 long for T and 2 short for I. Now the first one I dial in turns out to be the wrong one, so I turn the dial a bit further and get the correct identification. 1 long and 2 short. And the radio compass needle on the compass directly in front of me is pointing in the expected direction. Now with the direct vector to the airfield I can fly straight there as fast as I can. Which isn't that fast in a Huey gunship, as the helicopter is not made for very high speeds, but we get there eventually. It takes a while to get there with our speed, but we arrive at Kutasai and land in front of our medical facility. Which brings this mission to a successful end. And I hope I could show you some of the capabilities of the UH-1. Now, we use the automatic radio detection finder on this mission, which is one of the navigation tools you get in the full DCS modules, but not the only one, so I figured I'd give you another quick example for something else you can do with the Huey's radios. Now, in the next scenario, a LARP team has found a small enemy truck park in the jungle, and we, Griffin 26, are tasked to take it out in the early morning before they move the trucks. But how do we find this hidden target in a search area that has a diameter of 16 kilometers and there are forests everywhere? Well, the LARP team has the target in sight and we can find them by homing in on their radio signal. Of course, however, they don't carry a large non-directional beacon around with them for our ADF to home in on. Those things are huge radio towers. What they do have is a standard issue PRC-77 VHF FM radio though, and we have a VHF radio on our Huey as well, with which we can talk to them, but this radio also allows us to home in on their signal. They are on 34 MHz, so I let the co-pilot take the helm for a second while I go to my VHF FM radio set and dial that frequency in on it, so now we can hear them as soon as they start broadcasting and then home in on their position. And while I'm at it, I get my weapon systems ready as well, again selecting rockets, this time I only have the smaller 7-tube launchers though, and dialing the expected range in on the side. And then I take over again and we fly to the target area. And eventually, as I enter the search area, the LARP team comes up on the radio and starts broadcasting a countdown I can home in on. The transmission is pretty quiet though, and I don't think you will be able to hear it over the engine sound on YouTube, as I was barely able to understand it when I flew the mission with the sound much louder, but there are subtitles on the left upper corner. Now, with the broadcasting I simply switch my VHF radio to home, and now I can home in on this signal. This is not the compass though this time, but the round instrument below it. This doesn't have a needle that points straight at the target, but it shows from which direction the signal is coming from. The line was to the right, so I turned that way till it is centered, and now I'm flying directly towards the signal. And after flying in that direction for a few more minutes, I get another message from the LARP team. They have me in sight and the target is 500 meters to the east of their position. So since I just overflew them, I turn around to the east and pretty quickly I can spot the enemy camp and I can start to attack it. Now I can see some buildings which are easy to spot, but the trucks with their green camo in the low light conditions are actually pretty hard to see. I start to fire a few rockets into the camp, but after this first attack run with rockets, which was pretty much blind and just hoping that I hit something, I decide to extend my searchlight and turn that on. The Huey has a searchlight in the belly, which you can turn in all directions, so I move that to light the area up in front of me, and that makes it a little bit easier to see the enemy trucks that I'm engaging and supposed to destroy. In the meantime, my two door gunners are also opening up with their M60 machine guns and lighting the trucks up too. So with our combined firepower of rockets and machine guns, the trucks are quickly taken out and the objective fulfilled, and I start to head back home, again dialing in the ADF to get there faster. Now this was just a small example for using the radio's homing capabilities of the Huey. Well, and with this we are coming to the end of this video. I hope I could show off the helicopter and the detail of the module a bit with it. I do really enjoy the Huey a lot and might bring some more footage of it. I have a few ideas for more missions, not just combat related but also search and rescue type missions, if there's interest in this too, so let me know. Well, this is it for this video. As always, I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching and maybe I'll see you next time.